Oh, hi! Welcome to Aquatazoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the lifespan of animals in human care. This is one of the most common questions about any type of animal that you will ever hear in a zoo or aquarium. How long does it live? There are very many answers to that. It's complicated. But we'll just kind of get into some of the different factors that help us to answer this question. Generally speaking, the lifespan of an animal obviously is going to differ from animal to animal or species to species, but oftentimes a zoo or aquarium animal is going to live a little bit longer than its wild counterparts. Usually. That is not always the case. There are other circumstances that lead to that not being the case. So let's get into it. Listen, I work with aquariums, I work with fish. More than likely, a fish is going to live a much longer life in human care with us, where we're managing everything, than your average in the wild, right? And it's not necessarily because we're the best and greatest, although we are. Just kidding. It's more because there are likely less predators. There's less issue with the natural world that they might have. So things like water visibility, changing water quality, algal blooms and things like that tend to choke out water bodies and stuff like that are less common in aquariums. I will not say that they never happen. They do on occasion, but relatively infrequently, right? And while we manage predator and prey situations, we do have sharks in there with the fish and that sort of thing. There are a lot of our exhibits that are multi-species where there's territories involved. There's, infighting that happens in species, right? But more than likely, those predators and those other situations are being managed, actively managed in some way by the aquarists to minimize the issues. So I can't say that it never happens that a fish will not be picked off by a shark. It does happen on occasion, but it is surprisingly minimal. How do we get around that? Well, we definitely keep an eye on our sharks' diets and make sure that they get food regularly and in an amount that keeps them pretty satiated so that they don't feel like they need to hunt within the exhibit and get themselves a snack, right? It does happen on occasion because sharks are sharks. They're going to do what they naturally do. And we are dealing with wild animals. These are not pets. So then, if they sense that an animal is sick or injured or something like that, those instincts kick in really quickly and they will clean up the mess, if you will. And so if we can't get to an animal that needs medical attention before a shark realizes that it needs medical attention and gets their teeth on it, basically, then, that's a shorter lifespan for that animal than we would have wanted, right? But most of the time, we notice when these things are happening and we keep our sharks very comfortably fed so that they don't feel that, hunger pang and see an easy target, right? And so they're less likely to try and pick off another fish who might be showing some signs of, illness or injury. And we have a little bit more time to try and get to them first, to bring them out and start treatment. Zoos also, though they may not always be dealing with this predator-prey situation, they're also managing their animals closely, right? That we're always watching to see if we're seeing any signs of injury or illness or problems, and we try to act quickly to fix those, or at least separate that animal from the rest so it can be monitored more closely or something like that. We have veterinary care, which is wonderful. Vets on call, ready to go, right? And so if we do have an animal that's feeling a little under the weather or has an injury or something like that, we can get that addressed rather quickly, right? Like, I feel like I work faster on getting animals addressed than I do for myself when I'm feeling sick or injured. I'm much more concerned that they have what they need before I have what I need, right? So we are quick to get medical treatment or medical care for our animals, and that is not available to animals that are out in the wilderness, right? That are doing the natural thing in the natural habitat. They just got to keep going or not, right? They pretty much have two choices: either keep fighting or they will be removed from the situation by a predator or something like that who sees the weakness that they have, right? That's why a lot of animals don't show weakness or issue until it is too late and we can't treat, right? And so that happens on occasion as well, but we try to be very observant with all our animals, and fortunately we have them in a situation where we can get eyes on them and see what's going on, how they're eating, how they're walking, how they're swimming, how they're functioning day to day. We've got very close eyes on that. And if it's not the keepers themselves, often there's volunteers involved, or guests will let us know. Guests will always let us know when they see a problem or a potential problem. And they will not hesitate to make sure that we are aware and that we're thinking about it. So there are lots of eyes on these animals. And so we are fortunate in that because we have many eyes on the situation, that we are able to pinpoint issues pretty quickly. I dare say that the animals in human care tend to have access to some pretty fancy, high quality foods. So these are foods that they have regular access to. They don't have to work a whole lot for it. They might have to do some puzzles and do some hunting for it and all that stuff, but it's not quite on the same level as what they would experience in the wild. And the nutritional content of this food has been manipulated some, oftentimes, right? We end up, at least in the aquarium world, we end up freezing our food, our fish food, like the feeding fish that we have, before we offer it to the animals, just to make sure that the parasites, any parasites that might have been on or in the food, will not be introduced to our collection, right? So that affects the nutritional value of the food. And so we add vitamins, we make sure that things are supplemented, that foods are enriched with various vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and all that kind of stuff. So this is something that we try to maintain. We keep an eye on the animals, make sure that their activity and their nutrition budget is within a certain window so that they maintain a healthy weight. And we feed some pretty good stuff that they don't have to work super hard for. Now, that does mean that some animals tend to get what we call overconditioned, which means that they're a little on the heavier side because, there's not predators around, or at least not as many, and they can rest easy. They found their favorite place to be, their favorite corner, whatever, and they sleep a lot. They laze around a lot, right? Because life is easy. They don't have to do tons of digging or walk for miles to find their next meal or anything like that. It's coming. They know it's coming. And it's going to be high quality food. And it's got, vitamins and minerals and all the things that they need to maintain healthy skin, coats, scales, all of that stuff. And it's kind of engineered. That diet is engineered for that animal to make sure that they have everything they need and hopefully nothing more. Because it's easy for animals to get a little overconditioned when they're in human care, because those regular meals make life really easy. The fact that they don't have to constantly be alert and looking for food all the time makes things a lot easier. And so, yeah, there's a life-shortening condition that would be, animals being overweight, getting fatty livers, that kind of thing, that we try to avoid. But some species are a little bit more prone to it than others. And so we do work with vets and nutritionists to try and figure out, what's the perfect point where we want to be so that this animal has everything that they need and is not missing anything, vitamins or mineral wise, omega-3s and all that fun stuff, just like we do for ourselves. How do we make sure that they've got what they need, but they don't have too much extra, and they're maintaining good weight, and they're, those factors, the skin, the hair, all of that still looks good. They're not showing that they're having any kind of weakness or issue because of the diet, right? So close monitoring and particularly good food with lots of tweaks to make sure we dial it in right where we need to be, help animals to maintain healthy weights and make sure they get all of the vitamins and minerals that they need, and all of that nutritional stuff is in order like it would be in the wild, without them having to do tons and tons of work to get there, and without them having to be on alert all the time for food or for predators. And life is just a little bit easier. The stress level theoretically is lowered so that they can live a more comfortable, longer life. Also, we're trying to make things interesting. As keepers, we're trying to make sure that our animals are not just sitting in a pen, standing there all day, right? They're not just lazing about all the time. They do that sometimes, and a lot of times, depending on the species, that's a good portion of their day, right? Like cheetahs sleep a lot. They rest a lot. They only do that crazy running that's super fast a little bit out of the length of their day, right? And that's just to get certain food that they have to run down with a lot of effort, a lot of calories burned as they're doing that. But the rest of the time, they're lazing about, right? They're just soaking up some sun, cooling off in the shade maybe, and just resting a lot of the day. That is normal, whether that cheetah is in human care or is out on the savanna, right? It's just how it is. And so there are some instances where we're just encouraging animals to do what they normally would do. And for cheetahs, they're laying around. And that's how we want them to be. That's how we let them be, because that's what they would normally be doing otherwise. And to get them used to another type of lifestyle would probably be pretty stressful for them, because they're not built for that. They're built for high speed running in short bursts and only for short periods of the day and only at certain times, right? So letting them rest the rest of the time, that is completely normal. That's what we want. So, but there's other animals who are a little bit more inquisitive. Say, take otters for instance. They are incredibly curious little animals, and we want to make sure that they are being challenged, right? They are tool users. They figure things out and figure out solutions to things. They can open up shellfish using a rock, and they might have a favorite rock for that, right? They're very particular about what they like, don't like, and they like to investigate things and figure stuff out. So those are animals that we give a lot of enrichment to. We try to get them thinking and puzzle them and get them interested in stuff, because that's what they normally would be doing in the wild. They don't always just sit on the water or swim around all day long, right? They rest a lot, and they just investigate their situation. They eat a lot of different things, and that's because they're so inquisitive and they're looking for stuff, So we try to simulate that where we can. So there's lots of different animals, and depending on their intelligence and their normal activity that we have observed in the natural situation, we will tailor enrichment experiences and food opportunities and things to go along with that kind of natural schedule, natural behavior, to make sure that even though they're living in human care with us, that they're kind of getting a more natural experience. Yes, there's screaming kids around, but they're still able to do the types of behaviors that they would be doing even if they were in the remote portion of the world where they're from, right? We try to make it as natural, at least in behavior, as we can. So they might not be digging in, dead logs like they normally would. It might be an enrichment device that was created to simulate a dead log, because we don't have a dead log on exhibit, but we're just trying to make a version of an experience so that they can still exhibit that behavior and feel normal about it, right? It might not look exactly the same as the natural experience, but we try to make those opportunities available. We try to switch it up. We try to make it interesting. And a lot of effort is put into maintaining those natural behaviors, because not only is it more natural for the animal, but it's more interesting for guests to see and learn about and learn to care about those animals because they do those cool things, right? So it's a lot different to see a bear just sitting there on an exhibit, but then to see a bear that is in the water trying to lick peanut butter out of a bone is much more interesting. You've got the combination of swimming plus the investigation, and it's just funny to watch them try to lick stuff out of like a small hole. I've been very amused by it. But it's natural behavior. It's natural kind of stuff that they would do in the wild, and it makes people more interested in seeing what other kind of stuff they do, learning more about them, caring more about them, because if you let habitat be destroyed, you will never get to see a bear doing that in the wild, right? So I think the combination of observation, veterinary care, lack of predators, lack of danger, nutrition, all that fun stuff, enrichment, it all leads to a pretty fulfilling life for an animal. It's not perfect. We're still improving it every day. We learn new things all the time, and we're trying to improve it further. But overall, your average animal is probably going to live a little bit longer in human care just because we put tons of work into making sure that their experience is good, that their stress levels are low, that they are healthy, that they're maintaining good weight, that they don't have injuries or illnesses, and that they live a good, long, healthy life. Is it perfect? No, it is not. There are certain species that may not experience as long of a life, and there could be many reasons for that. But I guarantee you that there are more animals in the wild that are experiencing shorter lifespans because of human impact than the number of animals that are experiencing a shorter lifespan as a result of being in human care. One challenge that we cannot simulate really very well is migration behavior. So elephants or whales or birds of different types tend to experience a migration situation where they just travel for miles and miles and miles. We obviously cannot simulate that in an enclosed space like a zoo or aquarium. And so that is something that we think about a lot, right? We do know that the wild counterparts of these animals have a lot more space. And we do not have infinite amounts of space. It's gotten better, much, much better than it used to be when I was a kid. Might be dating myself a little bit, but when I was a kid and you go to the zoo, the animals had very small enclosures because they wanted those animals to be right up front and center. It didn't really matter that they weren't doing natural behaviors at that time. That was not the focus. You were trying to keep the animal alive, and you wanted it to be available for guests to see. And so it was not a naturalistic environment. It was not probably not a fun environment for those animals, but at least you could see it, I guess. We've come a long, long way, right? And we'll continue to improve. We'll learn new things and be able to do more stuff. And there's always the possibility that we elect to not have certain animals in our collections anymore. That's a very common sentiment with elephants, for example. And they're so challenging, they're so large, they're so smart, they form very tight bonds with each other, that sort of stuff, and it's debatable as to what's the best option for them, because they could be in a zoo or aquarium or in a sanctuary and living out their life there and maybe not have as much space as they're used to, or they could be on a savanna somewhere and be shot by a poacher, right? It's not it's not a good thing. There's no guarantee that they would have a better or longer life out in the wild than they do in human care. And so it's a tough debate. I can see the points on both sides. I understand, and I don't have the right answer. I don't know enough about elephants, honestly, and I've not worked with them closely enough to know what's best for them. But the animals that are in human care right now with AZA institutions are doing really well, right? We're doing the best we can with what we have. It may not be perfect for them, but they're living pretty long lives, a lot of them. and it's not perfect yet. We may continue to improve on that, or we may decide kind of as a group that maybe elephants are not the animal to exhibit in our institutions. Some zoos have already come to that conclusion. My aquarium definitely has. I'm just kidding. We don't have elephants. But there are some institutions who have decided to not have them in their collection anymore and to give them to sanctuaries or other institutions as better options. If you have a lone elephant, that's generally not a great situation for them. It's probably better for the elephant to be moved somewhere else so that it can be with a social group, right? So there are factors. I can't say that everything's perfect in human care, but we try really hard and we improve every day, right? So in cases where there's some things that happen with animals that we cannot simulate, migration being one of them, that might put some stress on an animal, right? And not lengthen their life the way we would hope that it would, right? Stress tends to shorten lifespans. It works for people that way. It works for animals that way. And so there are some imperfections, I would say, with animals being in human care and us not knowing absolutely everything about them and how to simulate everything that they need. So just understand, I'm not saying it's all rainbows and butterflies. I do understand that some animals do experience shortened lifespans. That could be primates, that could be elephants, it could be birds. Not every individual animal is going to live forever because they're in human care. I actually just this morning dealt with a fish that I honestly thought was going to live forever because it was just so angry. And I found it this morning and she was no longer with us, and I was very sad. So, even when we have animals that are in quote unquote perfect conditions, like, they seem to be quite content with where they were. The species that I'm talking about was pretty aggressive about territory, so whenever we'd go into clean, they'd be chewing on brushes and stuff. Because they didn't want their stuff touched. Understandable. But I saw this fish had been deceased as of this morning, and I was super sad. But that fish was probably close to 20 years old, which was really impressive for this species. I forget sometimes that these animals are not going to live forever, but typically, at least in aquarium living, they often live a very long time. I've got some fish that I take care of that I was surprised that I was losing them, and I thought I must be doing something wrong, and then come to find out that their lifespan is only like, say, 2.5 years, and I was losing them at 4. So, there's a lot at play here, right? And also, the average lifespan is different than, I guess, the median lifespan. So I remember when I was working at another aquarium, we would have to tell people that the average sand tiger shark would live only to 2 years. And that's just because the survival rate of that particular animal was so bad in the wild, right? And so, if an animal made it to adulthood, you probably average about 12. And then the sand tiger sharks that we had were averaging about 22. So it was a wild little bit of information. You're talking about what's the average lifespan overall, which could be maybe a year or two because the mortality rate of young animals is so high. Then if they can get past that hurdle of getting to adulthood, then you're probably talking an average lifespan of a different number, right? For sand tigers, average lifespan overall, 2 years. And then for the ones that reached adulthood, roughly 12. The ones that we had that were lumpy and bumpy and we still love them were in their 20s. And so it's hard to guess or measure how long exactly an animal's lifespan is, right? What answer do you give somebody who's asking that question? Normally we can kind of read the context of what they're trying to ask or trying to ascertain as far as the information is concerned. We'd probably stick with that 12-year mark for the sand tigers, right? So once you're talking about animals that reach adulthood, if they reach adulthood, then they're probably good for about 12 years. And then we can say, but ours are 22, and they continue to live past that. So, I know that there are certain fish that I work with that, they're getting into the end of their lifespan in probably about 20. And once you've gotten a solid 5 years past that, you're dealing with a really elderly animal and you're just trying to make them comfortable until they decide it's their time, right? So it's tough to answer that question. It's one of the most common questions that we get. First one is, where are the bathrooms? The second one is, what do they eat? And then the third one is usually, what's the lifespan, right? It's a complicated question because are we talking all animals total, including infant and, juveniles that don't necessarily survive to adulthood? Sea turtles are another one that most of the time I'd say you probably get a year out of a lot of sea turtles. But everybody knows that sea turtles live a very long time, right? And so it's very hard to answer the question. If a sea turtle can make it to adulthood, it's probably pretty good to live for a lifespan that's kind of comparable to your average human, right? But all of those animals that lose their lives early in the lifespan is dragging the life average down dramatically. So, you could have a nest full of 120 eggs. Only 2 of them are going to make it to adulthood. Those 2 will probably live good long lives, but the rest of them didn't. And therefore, your average is probably about a year. So that's what makes this kind of complicated. So, the easy living that a lot of these animals have can also impact their lifespan because they don't have stress, which could lengthen their lifespan, but they're also eating weird food. It is high quality food, of course, and we're trying to maintain nutrition in a very specific way, but sometimes these are high fatty foods, just like, the American diet, right? Some of us are a little heavier than others, myself included. And that's because we have a very rich diet, right? And it's kind of similar for animals in human care. It's not exactly what they would eat in the wild, but we've done enough analysis that we're kind of simulating what they would eat in the wild a lot of the time because we're kind of limited. We can't go to the middle of the jungle to get this, exotic food that this animal might eat a lot of the time, but we might be able to kind of combine a few different foods to kind of simulate that same nutritional profile. For example, for sea turtles, the closest thing that we have to them eating, green sea turtles specifically, the closest thing that we have to them eating seagrass and plant matter in the water, I don't have access to that all the time, like natural seagrasses and things. So the closest simulation to that is a combination of bell peppers and shrimp. That kind of, like, in a certain ratio, kind of simulates what they would normally be eating in the wild, which is great because bell pepper and shrimp are something that I can get, are foods that I can get on a regular basis that are easy to find and easy to maintain in our refrigerators and whatnot. But that seagrass, A, I don't want to pull the seagrass because it's needed out in the wild where it is. And B, I don't have the resources to get it, right? So we use the combination of other foods to kind of accomplish the same goal. But that can also lead to animals being overconditioned, overweight, and shorten their lifespan that way. They'll get fat deposits around their liver or something, and it just tends to lead to liver disease and shortens lifespan. It happens. But we're still learning. The point is that it's a hard question to answer, and we are still learning every day about how to take better care of these animals, how to reduce stress, how to maintain good welfare, and try to enrich their lives and elicit those natural behaviors and get all the good parts of natural type living while in close proximity to people, while educating all those visitors about the animals and their natural behaviors, their natural habitats, why they're important, the part that they play in the food web, and all that kind of stuff. These are simple questions that have a very complicated answer. I hope that helps. If you have any questions about that or any other zoo or aquarium things or leadership and management stuff, you know where to find me. You can write it up in an email and send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you're looking to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay. Thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.